Next Gen fam.
We are live. Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy Thursday afternoon. Justin, my man, how you feeling today?
What's going on, y'all? We hope everybody is doing well, building your dreams, building your businesses, building your lives, whatever you are doing out there. We're pumped for this episode of Momentum Audio. Filming it live. You're going to get it in the post-production in a few weeks. But y'all, we want to give a huge thank you to our sponsor for this episode, Zendesk. Next Gen, Dylan and I have done some shenanigans to keep up with customer success as Next Gen has scaled. Zendesk, we partnered together. It is a paid partnership. We are giving free 6 months of their Next Gen Zendesk for Startups program, help you level up your customer service. So check it out in the link. We'll put it in the show notes. So huge thanks to McGuire, the Zendesk team, for making this happen.
I am so fired up. Justin and I were talking backstage. It's been now going on year 4 of getting to learn from this product with Rahul, with his team at Superhuman. This one is close to home. We were just right before we signed on, getting Inbox Zero ourselves, doing our best in Superhuman. We're going to get to pick the man behind the company's brain. I'm fired up, Justin.
Superhuman, you don't even know the deal. All right, Rahul has not paid us to say this. It's very true. All right, he'll testify. So we pay for Superhuman for our entire team. Every single member of our team uses Superhuman. And we've debated this. It's quite a premium product. Does everybody really need it? Other companies, other founders even tell us, you pay for your whole team to use Superhuman? I'm like, I can't make this up. It is so valuable to the productivity of every single teammate we have. It is so valuable to our journey that Superhuman is a product that Dylan and we've probably brought more folks to Superhuman than our own business. We're literally repping it all the time. So we're absolutely pumped to bring Rahul to the stage. Rahul has an incredible story. And in this episode of MA, we're going to be diving in to Rahul's story, product market fit. How do you build things that customers love? And it's going to be really, really incredible. Shout out to Michael's son, Next Gen, one of our first ever team members who got us onto Superhuman like 2 years ago, really before so much of the rise. And we've been using it ever since. I've been so pumped for everything. So look, DJ's having some technical difficulties. He's off stage, so your boy J-Man has got to hold it down. But we got to get to this interview. So with that, I want to bring on Rahul. Is the founder and CEO of Superhuman. It is the fastest email experience in the world. Users, he tells you, guaranteed, they're going to get through your inbox twice as fast. He has, many have seen Inbox Zero with Superhuman for the first time in years. Dylan is so good with his email, he had to go off stage just for a minute and do his thing. DG, before we bring on Rahul, any final comments here, my man?
I'm so stoked to go. You got me coming in all right, Jay?
I got you, my man. Let's do it. Let's bring on Rahul. He founded Reportive. Now he's working on Superhuman. Rahul, welcome to the stage. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, folks. Thank you for having me.
Rahul, we are so honored to have you. Thank you for bearing with some of the technical difficulties here. For anybody who has yet to hear Rahul's story, take your way back. He was a game designer working on RuneScape. He was president of his college entrepreneurship society, co-founded Mojo, sold Reportive, now CEO of Superhuman. But my favorite of all accomplishments to date, he collects leather jackets. Rahul, confirm or deny for the people. Is it true?
It is true. I happen not to be wearing it today, but I do have a large collection of leather jackets. It's almost embarrassingly large.
Rahul, you have done the startup thing multiple times now and have really one of somebody that Dylan and I look up to when it comes to building something that people want, really the true nature of what it is. Who piqued your interest in startups from the beginning? How did you get started, starting to create, starting to tinker, started to build?
I think the person who piqued my interest, especially when it comes to Silicon Valley, was Paul Graham back in the day. So for context, this would have been around 2002, 2003, when I was in my first or my second year of studying computer science. For my undergraduate, I studied computer science at the University of Cambridge. And especially at that time, even though the web was connecting everybody, really nobody over in England knew about Paul Graham or Y Combinator or his essays. And I think I was the only person in my entire cohort of computer science students that was reading them. And it took me a while to act upon them, but slowly and surely the seeds settled until a few years into Cambridge. I distinctly remember the moment. I was with my girlfriend at the time. And, as you do early on in a relationship, you're sort of asking each other what you have in mind for your life plan, for your career. And at the time, she wanted to be a doctor. And she asked me, what do I want to do? And so this would have been around 2005, 2006. I just graduated. And I said, no joke, without blinking, I'm going to start a company, move to Silicon Valley, scale it, sell it, and do that all over again. And that's probably what I'm going to do, rinse and repeat. And she just burst out laughing because, who does that? But looking back, that was, of course, exactly what I've done. And I have no intention to sell Superhuman, but every intention to scale it. And it's still what we're doing today.
That is absolutely incredible. I think for anybody out there who's listening, our next generation audience can so resonate with feeling a bit on an island. As entrepreneurs who are building our dreams at a young age, college, high school, Rahul was 8 years old playing around with his dad's computer, it's a lonely and daunting journey. What was your community and ecosystem like? Even if not at college, you had to go find it. So how did you bridge the gap of, I'm in the UK, I'm in England, I want to be in Silicon Valley building companies. How did you take that first step in making it happen, Rahul?
Well, ultimately, there is no real shortcut. And when you're faced with the absence of community, what do? I created my own community. So I got involved in the part of the university that helps staff and students create companies. This is a student-run organization, Cambridge University Entrepreneurs. At the time, we ran the largest student-run business planning and creation competition in all of Europe. It was modeled after the MIT competitions that started a few years earlier. And that really put me in the center of entrepreneurial activity at the university. I also learned how to fundraise, doing not-for-profit fundraising, which is the hardest but the best way to learn. So I had to go to wealthy business angels, I had to go to technology companies, I had to go to venture capital firms and ask them for money so we could then grant it to staff and students who wanted to create businesses. Now, you might think that's an easy sell, all of us growing up in technology, but it was actually quite a hard sell because we weren't giving any equity in return. This was really learning how to sell people on doing the right thing and for the feel good and for the brand value that they might get in return. And that was my first fundraising gig ever. Now, I did it surprisingly well enough that I could actually pay myself full-time to run the organization and started building a community and a network around me of people who really understood how entrepreneurship works and who were interested in it. And that was really the first step to figuring out how to get over here to Silicon Valley, join Y Combinator, and then, the rest is history.
So in that history, Rahul, the rest is history. I want to zoom in on Reportive. When Dylan and I were getting started on our entrepreneurial journey, it was one of the first, I thought it in that bucket of tools. I couldn't even imagine, hacking my way to figuring out getting in the game. A friend, Mina, shout out Mina Salib, told me about this. And I'm like, whoa, this is pretty cool. And it was when I was probably, 16, 17, it was part of my first tech stack and that first tool. And it, for me, just was like, I was so amazed at having a product. I was telling my friends about it. You got to use it. I was writing about it. So what went into that organization? You had some experience by then, a couple of tries at this, but then you really started to scale and go big. What was happening at that point in your life? Where are you? You're on the West Coast. Give us an insight into what was happening.
Well, I was actually still in England when I started Reportive, and I just come off the tail of a previous company, Mojo, which unfortunately did not succeed. And I did what I call walking in the wilderness for about a year, just sort of trying different ideas, consulting to pay the bills. People often asked me in the years that followed, how did you survive? Because you didn't really make any money. And one of the things that I think entrepreneurs figure out how to do is to parlay the last thing into the next thing and to continuously create buffer to proceed. So even though the last company didn't make any money, I didn't actually have that much of outgoing expense because I was still living in Cambridge. Cambridge is a university town. You don't need that much to survive. Through the course of the last company, I had become a pretty competent web developer. I was actually the CTO of Mojo. And so I'd learned the basics and then beyond the basics on everything that you need to start and scale a web company. And I was able to sell that time at about £700 a day. So back then that would have been about north of $1,000 a day. Now, how much was I spending at the time? Probably about $15,000 to $20,000 a year. So you could do less than a month's worth of consulting to pay for an entire year's worth of startup discovery. That's exactly what I did. I worked the occasional day here or there. Over the course of the year, worked for about 30 days doing consulting. I spent the rest of the time looking for a startup that would work. And then I distinctly remember it because I'd had a number of things that had failed, and I was actually feeling quite depressed at the end of the day about all of these failures. And then I was in the shower one time thinking, well, what is it that I know how to do well? And I remembered my time back at Cambridge University Entrepreneurs, where I was running this volunteer organization, where I was doing all of this fundraising. And I just remember thinking, wouldn't it have been so much easier if whenever any of these VCs or angels or big tech company executives emailed me, I had everything about them over on the right-hand side of my email. I had their recent tweets, I had their LinkedIn profile, I had their job title and their picture, so I don't mistake them for somebody else or make the classic error where you assume a Sam is male because the name Sam generally is, but actually it's short for Samantha. Stuff like that. I'm not naturally brilliant with people, but I knew that with the right tooling, I could be. And so with that, I envisioned Rapportive, and I realized that this was a thing that lots of people could probably want. So I just sat down in Cambridge at the time and decided to make it. This was January the 10th, 2010, I believe, was when I wrote the first line of code. And then a few months later, still pretty much a single founder at this point, we had this moment where we went from about 10 users internally at the little incubator that I was working in to 10,000 users overnight. Then 2 weeks later, it was around 20, 30,000 users. Then all of the Silicon Valley angels that we all know and love started reaching out to me. Jason Calacanis was the first person who reached out. And then I realized we had something. And this was the golden ticket. This was how we get to leave Cambridge, move to Silicon Valley. I took part in Y Combinator in summer 2010. And then less than 2 years later, ended up selling that company to LinkedIn.
Wow. Absolutely inspiring story. For anybody who is not building in the Valley, Rahul is telling you, you don't even have to be in the States. You could be across an ocean or two and you can figure it out. Obviously not easy. Comes with its own breadth of challenges, I'm sure. I want to dive into that Rapportive exit, Rahul.
I wouldn't recommend it, by the way. If you have the choice, move to Silicon Valley first. In the transition from England to the US and moving my co-founders, their significant others or their girlfriends, their families, I estimate that we probably wasted a man-person's worth of effort in that transition. Wow. It was incredibly time-consuming. And I suspect had we not had to do that, Rapportive would have been a billion-dollar company. But it was very distracting, of course, to do the move.
Wow. Anecdotally, looking for an apartment in Manhattan, it seems like a full-time job in itself, so I can hear you right now. But Rahul, I want to stay on that. You mentioned just now, could have been perhaps on that path to the billion. 5 people full-time when you sold. There were rumors on the exit price. It was never actually shared publicly. But clearly it's not at the billion number. Do you have any regret looking back on having let go at that time? Or do you think that it was the right time to get LinkedIn on as a partner, to go and tackle that with a larger team organization? Talk to us about the mindset and how you look back in hindsight.
The mindset is that we were tired. Let me answer your first question first. Do I have any regrets? Absolutely no. It was 100% the right choice for us to make. When you adjust the risk that we took for the time that it took us to get there, for the amount of money that everybody involved made, the founders, the employees, and the investors, it was really a phenomenal outcome for everybody. And I got to work at the time and even today at one of the classic Silicon Valley companies. LinkedIn, of course, one of the top 3 consumer internet social network companies. And I got to see what a real scaling company looks like just after going public. I got to see what product management actually is. I got to see what it's like to be in an organization that went from around 1,700 people when I joined to nearly 3,000 by the time that I left. And I got to reflect as well. So many great things came out of it. There is a lot of value to sort of locking in your first win and putting that notch on your belt so you can come back around later and swing even bigger, as of course we are now doing with Superhuman. The mindset, though, was one of fatigue. And I think this is something that I would just counsel to every entrepreneur listening who hopefully one day has this problem, which is a really great problem to have, is somebody comes along and says, hey, we want to buy your company. It can be easy to say yes just because you're tired. And we were all 18 months in. We'd done a whole several thousand mile continent transition, fighting the immigration service just as much as we were fighting for fundraising, as we were for market penetration and all of that good stuff. And it is so easy to say, I am tired, we'll take this, we'll bank the cash, we'll make sure our customers are taken care of as well, and then we'll move on to the next thing. That's not the right reason to sell a company, not simply because you're tired. Because if you're tired, what you can do is take a break. And I know it may sound crazy when you're in the middle of it, this idea that actually you're allowed to take a break. You're allowed to go off whatever it is, 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, however long it is you need to not be burned out and to come back and really assess things with a fresh pair of eyes. That is okay. That is allowed. Now, we didn't give ourselves that luxury when we were in the process of this transaction, because we were actually only a few months and then later on a few weeks away from running out of money, yet we still managed to sell the company at a premium. That's a whole other story. But we were really up to the wall, and so we didn't have that opportunity. But if you do, simply because you're tired, don't just sell the company. Really do give yourself the time to figure out whether or not it's the right thing to do. Now, in our case, it did happen to be the right thing to do, so we made the right decision.
Amazing.
And Rahul, it's very obvious from Dylan and I having been personally onboarded by early members of your team, the way you're building Superhuman is that you're playing such a long game, really investing in being patient, especially now. And it's interesting to say patient when you've experienced such rapid growth, but I think patience is very well manifested in the Superhuman story. Talk to us about that transition, early days of Superhuman. You were tired, you did exit, it was the right decision at the end of the day. What happens? Walk us through the rest of the story and take us to the early days of Superhuman. Where's the idea coming from? And set the scene for what's just an incredible ride from there.
Great question. So Rapportive grew rapidly, and like I said, within 2 years, we were acquired by LinkedIn. And during those 4 years, the 2 years of Rapportive and the 2 years of LinkedIn, I developed a very intimate view of email. I could see Gmail getting worse every single year, becoming more cluttered, using more memory, consuming more CPU, slowing down your machine, still not working properly offline. And on top of this, people were installing plugins like ours, Rapportive, but also Boomerang, Mixmax, Clearbit, Yesware, you name it, they had it. And each plugin took these problems of clutter, memory, CPU performance offline, and made all of them dramatically worse. So we decided it was time for change. We imagined an email experience that is blazingly fast, where search is instant, where every interaction is 100 milliseconds or less. An email experience, as you know, where you never have to touch the mouse, where you can do everything from the keyboard. You can quite literally fly through your inbox. An email experience that just worked offline, so you could be productive anywhere, and an email experience that had the best Gmail plugins, but built in natively, and was still somehow subtle, minimal, and visually gorgeous. And so with that, we built Superhuman. That was the initial founding vision for Superhuman. And I'm very excited today to say that Superhuman is absolutely the fastest email experience in the world. Like you mentioned, folks get through their inbox twice as fast as before. They see inbox zero for the first time in years. They can actually maintain it, which is pretty life-changing. And we actually just wrapped up an analysis where now I've got to the point where 36% of all our customers actually hit inbox zero in the onboarding itself. And more than half of all of our customers hit inbox zero within 4 hours of starting to use the product. So it's working even better than I thought it would. And, that sends chills down my spine. That is why we get up every day.
That is absolutely incredible. Congratulations, Rahul, to your entire team. As 2 users and many behind us on the Next Gen team and the Next Gen family, we can attest to everything Rahul is saying. That is not a paid advertisement. That is 1,000,000% the truth. And I want to really hone in on something Justin mentioned, and behind the stage we were talking about the customer interaction, right? You don't even call it the typical terms. You have your own terms that are based off Superhuman's values, delight and joy, and these values that do bleed through. I will never forget my onboarding. Rahul, talk to us for our audience out there who is so in, let's move fast, let's blitz scale, shout out to LinkedIn. How did you take that theory, but apply it in your own way, giving that white glove service that our users have really come to love and to appreciate and to understand is the norm with Superhuman?
I've seen a lot of companies, especially in our space, which I would broadly define as productivity, get customer onboarding wrong. I no longer believe in the traditional launch. Let's say you've built a new email client or a new task manager or a new calendar app. Now, the surface area for these products is absolutely massive. It's bigger than almost any domain that you could think of. What that means is that you also get a massive surface area for bugs, as well as massive variability in how users want to use the product. Now, most companies would launch their app, and because the demand for these products is so high, they'd quickly get tens of thousands of users, just like Reportive did back in the day. But guess what? These users will find thousands of bugs, and the company would quickly get overwhelmed. They will not be able to fix issues fast enough, and so these users will become disappointed. They'll churn out of the product, and then they'll tell everybody about their experience. That is the very definition of a net detractor. Now, in my experience, it's significantly better to do what we do, onboard customers at a measured pace every single week. Obviously, the number goes up every single week, but that way you have the bandwidth to find and fix issues as they happen, and you can focus on making customers exceptionally happy. Now, all of that said, there are 3 circumstances where it does actually make sense to consider a traditional launch, and that is when you need one of what I call the 3 Cs: capital, candidates, or customers. If you need one or more of these, then maybe you should consider a launch just to be top of mind for a period of time.
Rahul, you take the anti-playbook. You don't blitz scale, do the launch, pour all your VC capital into ads, but you say we're going to go slow, really spend intimate time with our customers, getting them excited, and then without paying us, create 2 super users. And our whole team, and so many tuning in, Mal, Andrew, Noel, Chris. He's my hero, proud super user, even from Malachi, which I could not agree more. Once you go superhuman, you never go back. So Rahul is very clear that process is a really dedicated, intentional strategy. Talk to us about the founding early team that you put together for Superhuman, because Dylan and I weren't onboarded by you. We were onboarded by members of your team who felt that same level of passion, of dedication. I was amazed by the experience. It's only a 15-minute call, but I was amazed by the experience. So how did you put together that early team? What were you looking for, and who was part of that journey?
We didn't actually hire for growth and onboarding until we were around 15 going on 20 people. So the founding team, which most companies would generally define as up to, say, 10, 15 people, were actually all mostly EPD, engineering, product, and design. And then the functions, of course, that help you get that. So G&A and recruiting and so forth. For those people, we very much indexed towards people who are either entrepreneurs before, or they wanted the thrill of the entrepreneurship rocket ship. And they worked out remarkably well for us. Now, if you want to laser in on onboarding and how we built that team, for any founder considering onboarding, I would actually do it in 4 discrete phases. Phase 1 is basically, can the founder onboard? And does it result in great metrics? If you, the founder of the company, can't generate good outcomes, then you know that you probably still don't have product market fit and you have work to do. Now, in this case, I wouldn't worry about the length of the onboarding, and the green lights to move from this phase to the next phase is that the metrics are great. Now, phase 2 is, can somebody other than the founder onboard and still generate great metrics? At this point, I would start reducing the length of the onboarding to evolve towards scale, and the green light here is that metrics are still great. Phase 3, this is where you build a full stack growth team. You're further reducing the length of the onboardings, and you're building training plans for phase 4. Green light, once again, the metrics are still great. And phase 4, this is probably what you all experienced, build a dedicated team of onboarding specialists. This is all about repeatable processes. It's all about building efficiency whilst maintaining what makes the experience magical. And I'm happy if you want to jump into more details in any of those phases.
Incredible. Anybody who's out there, I hope you have your journal and pen in hand. A masterclass on onboarding right here going on. I want to talk about the customer side of it, given that there are a few, let's say, schools of thought when it comes to innovating and where the customer sits. Are they a partner? Are they the solution to innovation? You have the classic, the customer would have never said they wanted a car. They'd ask for a faster horse, right? And then you have someone who is hand-holding a customer. Rahul, for those who are out there, he emailed me about 6 months ago asking a few questions on price sensitivity. The founder. Now, we don't have to talk about if that's actually you, some man in the inbox. I think it was you, though, knowing you in this conversation. There you go. Where do you fall, Rahul? Where does that, is it a spectrum or is it opportunistic? Maybe talk to us about how you view the customer in innovation.
They are, I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. The customer is fully at the center of innovation. That said, one shouldn't fall into the trap of only building what people say it is that they think they want. You gave the faster horse example. So we, as I think you know, we've built our very own product market fit engine. And this is an engine that is designed to take everything that you believe from a vision perspective and reinforce it with data from customers, but also to take everything that customers are telling you to uncover any blind spots or unknown unknowns you may have about your own business, to combine those things systematically, and then it gives you a way to actually numerically optimize your degree of product market fit. This is why we call it a product market fit engine. It can even write your roadmap for you. And the crazy thing is this is a roadmap that is pretty much all but guaranteed to take you to product market fit over time in a very numerical sense. We came up with this about 2 years into the history of the company, have been running it ever since. It inspired a whole generation of entrepreneurs to use this. It's now become a de facto way to measure product market fits in Silicon Valley. It's remarkably effective. So if folks haven't come across this products market fit engine before, I highly recommend you check it out. I wrote up an essay on First Round Review 1 or 2 years ago when I came up with it.
We're going to make sure to link that, Next Gen Fam, in the show notes. So definitely be sure to check out that First Round Review article, all of Rahul's writings. Rahul, is there any blind spot that you had in your first couple of startups, ventures that you're really intentionally going into Superhuman to avoid? You have such a benefit of the hindsight, all the experiences before, and now getting to do it really right from the beginning, building a great product, building that great team. What are some of those blind spots that maybe you had before, or problems you made that you were very intentional to not make that mistake again?
There are more than we have time to get through. I made so many mistakes and continue to make them. To make mistakes is natural, it's human. We obviously all do our best. And it's being outside of our comfort zone that really makes this the rewarding role that it is. One that I think it's easy to make, and I was actually warned against it, but I made it nevertheless. I'll repeat the warning in the hopes that perhaps folks listening to this won't make the same mistake. So this was shortly after we landed in the Bay Area. We had been accepted to Y Combinator, and we were networking to try and get as much advice and to learn as much as possible from great founders and CEOs who'd come before us. Now, we also at the time happened to be one of the largest apps on Heroku. Reportive was the largest database on Heroku for several years in a row. And I met with James Lindenbaum, who at the time was the CEO of Heroku. He was one of the co-founders up near his offices in San Francisco. And I pitched him the product, and he was very excited. He thought it was great. And he gave me a piece of advice. He said, Rahul, you have to be very clear, given the small amount of money that you're raising, which, by the way, to me at the time did not seem like a small amount of money because it was a real slog to get there. It was $1 million, which for that time for a seed round was considered respectable. These days it would be considered very, very small. But he said, given the small amount of money that you're raising, you have to know whether you're trying to push monetization and get all the revenue, or whether you're trying to push user growth and get all the users. If you try and do both, you probably won't succeed because your focus will be split. So you really have to know which one of the two you're doing. And I remember thinking, sitting down in his office, I can actually still visualize it to this day. It was pelting it down in rain, classic San Francisco weather. I remember thinking, okay, I got this. But in reality, went straight over my head. Because what did I do when running Reportive? Totally vacillated between those two things. There'd be months at a time when we'd try to get all the users by making the best possible product, months at a time where we'd actually be trying to make money and figuring out what premium features we were going to build to end up monetize. But as is hopefully obvious from my description of that so-called strategy, it's almost a clear recipe for failure. So for Superhuman, and I also advise this to every company I invest in, every founder that I work with, we have a very clear and crisp strategy. We know how much we're trying to monetize, how much we're not trying to monetize. We, from the outset, knew exactly what kind of person that we were trying to sell to. We knew why they would buy our thing. We knew what competitive advantages we had. We knew what disadvantages we had. And it testaments to the strategy that I can still pull up a slide back from 2014, 2015 that defined the strategy, and it's still true today. We've had to tweak it a little bit around the edges, but it is still substantially the same strategy today as we came up with about 5-6 years ago. So I think that's the most important thing, is have a strategy and stick to it. Don't vacillate on a sort of monthly or a quarterly basis, maybe change it on a yearly basis. I think that's one of the most important things. One other important thing, and this was from Andrew Chen, who is now obviously a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz. I knew him through his writing. At the time, he was running a company, but probably better known for the amazing writing he'd been doing on growth and user acquisition and virality and so forth. I met with him whilst I was at LinkedIn, and we kind of did a post-mortem of Reportive together and how it could have gone better. And he was asking me about my metrics, and he was like, well, how many downloads were you getting a day? And, I didn't know, which red flag number one. But I remember thinking, it was probably about 4,000 downloads per day. And he said, well, did you ever try and optimize that? Did you ever work on funnel conversion, landing pages, paid acquisition, actual growth mechanics, loops, virality, all of that stuff? And I had to honestly answer, no, Andrew, we actually never tried. All that we ever did was continually make the product better and better and better. And he was like, well, there's your problem right there. Had you just put some time into optimizing this thing, you would probably have found a 10x. You could probably have got from 4,000 downloads a day to 40,000 downloads a day. And guess what? You'd probably still be running a company. You would have figured out monetization. You would have been making $100 million of revenue by now, and you'd be off to the races. And so that really resonated with me. It's also the same message that Gabriel Weinberg and Justin Mez give in their amazing book, Traction. If folks listening or watching have not read it, definitely read it. It's a really quick read. Absolute mandatory reading for any founder and any PM who joins my team. Traction makes the same argument, which is you want to spend roughly half your time developing the core product, but also half your time working on distribution, on traction. And then finally, you can use the product market fit engine to figure out when to start investing in product, in traction, in distribution. It is, of course, when 40% or more of your target population would be very disappointed without your product. So putting those three ideas together, we were able to make Superhuman a much, much bigger success and a much more strong and stable company with extremely bright prospects by comparison to Reportive.
Rahul, thank you so much for sharing that, for your vulnerability and admitting that you didn't get everything right. You're always getting better. You are always a work in progress. And on that note, with the last few minutes of our interview time, I want to go behind the superhuman to the superhuman. And I want to learn more about who Rahul is. Clearly, for anybody who's listened today, who's watched this interview live, you have such a calm and composed demeanor. You are intentional to the core, as your company's value would state. Talk to us about any habits or any practices that you believe are required to be that superhuman, to be your best Rahul, whether that's a morning routine or anything that you like to keep.
So I can only share what works for me. Of course, what works for me may not work for anybody else. Our core company values are create delight, be intentional, and remarkable quality. So one of the questions I'm always asking myself is, how can I adopt behaviors and habits that actually optimize for those core values? So for create delight, I actually used to be a game designer back in the day. This value stems from my background as a game designer. In game design, we have a very deliberate definition of delight. It actually turns out to be pleasant surprise. And I'm constantly asking myself, whenever making any feature, designing any experience, training the team, talking to the company, how can we make this thing delightful? How can we imbue it with elements of pleasant surprise? Next up would be intentional or be deliberate. I don't think of myself actually as a particularly analytical or right-brained person. That said, David Ulevich, who's on our board along with Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz, says that for a B2B/B2C company, because we straddle that line, we're actually the most instrumented and the most analytically driven in his portfolio, which to me seems weird because I can imagine what being fully data-driven is, and I know that we're nowhere near there. We're about 50-50. So I try and maintain a half left brain, half right brain approach to any decision-making. And I think Reid Hoffman actually has a pretty good framework for this. He says, speed, all other things being equal, is probably the biggest competitive advantage you have. So as a CEO, one of the things that you need to cultivate is the ability to take high quality decisions very quickly. Now, how do you develop that? You develop that by training your wisdom, training your intuition. So what you do when you're faced with a decision is ask yourself the question, well, what is my gut sense? What is my intuition telling me to do? But don't just go and do that. Then ask yourself the question, what data could I find that would dissuade me from this course of action, that would make me go elsewhere? Now go off and then see if you can find that data. If you can't, follow your intuition. And this is not only a recipe for developing your intuition, it's also a recipe for making decisions really quickly and helping a company move fast. So that's the thing that I try and practice there. And then finally, on remarkable quality, it's really just about being a designer in every aspect of my life, sometimes to the frustration of the people around me, where you're constantly asking the question, why are we doing this that way? Was it a deliberate choice? And did we optimize for quality? All design is, at the end of the day, is deliberately making decisions about increasingly small details with an intended purpose in mind. And obviously you could do that in visual design, but you could do that in experience design. You could do it in designing a house. I've just moved into this house and I'm very deliberately considering every single aspect of how the house is put together. So that's one of the final things that we do. And then to wrap it all together, one practice that has honestly been transformational for me is I now practice transcendental meditation. So twice a day, first thing in the morning when I wake up, and then in the afternoon at around 3 or 3:30, which may seem shocking or weird to some people, but I actually carve it out of my day. It's in the calendar. I will stop meetings. I'll go off and meditate for half an hour, and then I'll come back. And what I've found is that this massively increases my ability to focus. It increases the length of time for which I can focus. And it also increases my ability to be creative and to take higher quality decisions. So between create delights, between be intentional, between remarkable quality, pulling on aspects of game design and transcendental meditation to make all of these things come together, that's how I bring my best self to work. And it's also how we share the values across the organization as for what being a superhuman really is in the context of our company.
Well, thank you so much for unpacking this for us and giving us a peek behind the curtain of what you're doing to be your best self and how your organization is being set up to really stick to those values and manifest them every single day. Last question before we let you go. Rahul, you see a lot of founders, you see a lot of CEOs, a lot of investors, and you have some incredible writing. We're going to link in the show notes, the Next Gen Fam, to his NFX articles, first round articles. But Rahul, you probably see a lot of bad advice out there as well, or maybe advice that you necessarily wouldn't agree with. So, before we let you out of here, is there any piece of bad advice or, common trend given out there in the startup, early stage entrepreneurial world that you maybe aren't 100% on board with and would maybe direct folks to some of your writings to unpack it a little bit further?
Most of it, unfortunately. I'm extremely contrarian, as you know. Okay, I'll just rattle some off and point people to where they can find out more. So first of all, this idea that you should launch your product or launch your company, as we already discussed, I think that's a terrible idea, generally speaking. What you should instead do is attempt to raise money to be around ahead of traction, to buy yourself the time to iterate using techniques like the product market fit engine. So that's one thing. Another thing is launching versus customer onboarding. For all the reasons we described, I highly recommend trying the customer onboarding approach, especially if you are entering a market that already exists, and so there's a very high level of incumbent you're up against, or, and especially if also the product surface area has a high degree of complexity. Another would be how we build products in general. Most Silicon Valley, most venture-backed companies are laser focused on what users say they need and they want, but I think, as you know, that's not how we build things at Superhuman. We actually build software like it's a game. We obsess over how users feel. Because when you build software like it's a game, people don't use your product, they play it. They find it fun, they enjoy it, they tell their friends. And that turns out to be a whole different kind of product development. And so I would recommend studying game design. As for some resources to get going on all of this, I would suggest the first round article for Product Market Fit. I would suggest an interview I did with Pete Flint over at NFX for customer onboarding. I also cover some really interesting things about pricing and positioning that I think would be valuable for founders. And then for game design, I suggest checking out a talk that I gave at the Andreessen Horowitz Summit just over a year ago. And it's also on their blog if you prefer to read. The video is there as well, on a quick primer on how to build software like it's a game. And then if you want a book to back that up, The Art of Game Design by Jesse Schell is one of the best books on the topic. It's where I started. It's definitely where I'd recommend anyone else start as well. So I could keep on going. I basically do every single thing differently to how you're meant to do it. But those are some starting points to start learning how to do things differently.
We are so grateful for you, Rahul. Opening up your playbook, not the world's, but Rahul's. He is the founder and CEO of Superhuman, entrepreneur extraordinaire, investor, you name it, truly a superhuman. We are absolutely blessed and grateful to have had you join us on Momentum Audio. Rahul, thank you for coming on board today.
Thank you both. Take care.
Be well. Rahul is the man.
Unbelievable.
He is
so well-spoken,
so present, so well-spoken, so intentional, so well thought through in how clearly he's building his life, his business, his empire, frankly, of what they are trying to put together. Super inspiring, super incredible. That was awesome.
The learning, as anybody out there knows, Next Gen, we are all about never stop learning. That is our perhaps number one core value, depending on which day it is. Rahul looks back in the past, is trying to learn about how to take it today, to apply it to the long game 24/7. He's building those machines, those processes. He has the articles to tell you exactly what works for him. That's what it's about. And now let's go find it for ourselves. We got our homework cut out for us. I love it. He gave us the reading material.
I got to go meditate way more. Hit the afternoon. It's non-negotiable. It's got to be non-negotiable.
Bam.
I'm picking up the book on game design literally right after this on Amazon. And Next Gen fam, we're like the biggest Superhuman users in the world. So I'll refer you. I wish that was cool anymore, but now you can kind of get it yourself, but we'll still refer you.
We'll refer you. You get a free month. We get a free month. That's how it works.
Next Gen fam, thank you for joining us. Momentum Audio with Rahul, CEO of Superhuman. Incredible, incredible interview. And we look forward. We want to know what you want to hear from. Who do you want to bring on next? We're trying to bring you the entrepreneurs of all walks of life, athletes, musicians, entrepreneurs, the game changers building their greatest lives. Huge thank you once again to Zendesk, McGuire, their incredible team. Next Gen, they have a startup, Zendesk for Startups program. You have free 6 months if you apply. We'll link that in the show notes as well. And we look forward to hearing you back on our next Momentum Audio.
Big shout out to Zoe Gambardella. Zoe, we love you. We appreciate your support, and we'll catch you back here soon. Next Gen fam.